We're going to go ahead and finish the chapter that we're in the middle of right now. So we know that Reuben just died from a tragic accident with an axe. Arriving home, I awakened my mother and father. Starting at my grandfather's mill, I told everything that had happened. I left nothing out. My mom had started crying long before I had completed my story. Papa said nothing, just sat and listened. When I had finished, he kept staring down at the floor in deep thought. I could hear the sobbing of my mom in the silence. I walked over to her. She put her arms around me and said, "My poor little boy." Getting to his feet, Papa reached for his coat and hat. Mama asked him where he was going. "Well, I'll have to go up there," he said. "I'm going to get Grandpa, for he is the only man in the county that has authority to move the body." Looking at me, he said, "You go across the river and get Old Man Lowry. You may as well go on up and tell the Bufords, too. Tell them to meet us at your grandfather's place." I hurried to carry the sad message. The following day was a nasty one. A slow, cold drizzle had set in. Feeling trapped indoors, I prowled from room to room. I couldn't understand why my father hadn't come back yet from the Pritchards. I sat by the window and watched the road. Understanding my feelings, Mama said, "Billy, I wouldn't worry. He'll be back before long. It takes time for things like that." "I know," I said, "but you would think he would have been back by now." Time dragged slowly by. Late in the afternoon, I saw Papa coming. Our old mule was jogging along. Water was shooting out from under his feet in small squirts at every step. Papa had tied the halter rope around the mule's neck. He was sitting humped over with his hands jammed deep in the pockets of his patched and worn mackinaw. I felt sorry for him. He was soaking wet, tired, sleepy, and hungry. Telling Mama, "Here he is," I grabbed my jumper and cap, ran out to the gate, and waited for him. I was going to ask him what had happened at the Pritchards, but on seeing his tired face and wet clothes, I said, "Papa, you had better go into the fire. I'll take care of the mule, and I'll do the feeding and the milking." "That would be fine," he said. After doing the chores, I hurried to the house. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find out what had happened. Walking into the front room, I saw my father had changed clothes. He was standing in front of the fireplace drinking coffee. "Boy, that's bad weather, isn't it?" he said. I said it was and asked him about Reuben. "We went to the old tree and got Reuben's body," Papa said. "We were on our way back to the Pritchards when we met them. They were just this side of their place. They had started to look for him. Rainey had been so dazed when he got home, they couldn't make out what he was trying to tell them, but they knew that it must have been something bad. They wanted to know what had happened. I did my best to explain the accident. It hit Old Man Pritchard pretty hard. I felt sorry for him." Mama asked how Mrs. Pritchard was taking it. Papa said he didn't know, as he never did get to see any of the women folk. He said they were the funniest bunch he'd ever seen. He could not understand them. There wasn't one tear shed that he could see. All the men stayed out at the barn. They never had been invited in for a cup of coffee or anything. Mama asked when they were going to have the funeral. "They have their own graveyard right there on the place," Papa said. Old Man Pritchard said they would take care of everything and didn't want to bother anybody. He said it was too far for anyone to come, and it was bad weather, too. Mama said she couldn't help feeling sorry for Mrs. Pritchard and wished they were a little more friendly. I asked Papa about Rainey. Papa said, according to what Old Man Pritchard said, Rainey just couldn't seem to get over the shock. They were figuring on taking him into town to see the doctor. In a stern voice, Papa said, "Billy, I don't want you fooling around with the Pritchards anymore. You have plenty of country around here, so you don't have to go there to hunt." I said I wouldn't. I felt bad about the death of Reuben. I didn't feel like hunting and kept having bad dreams. I couldn't forget the way that he had looked at me just before he died. I moped and wandered around in a daze. I wanted to do something, but didn't know what it was. I explained my feelings to Mother. She said, "Billy, I feel the same way and would like to do something to help, but I guess there's nothing we can do. There are people like the Pritchards all through the hills. They live in little worlds of their own and are all alone. They don't like to have outsiders interfere." I told my mother I had been thinking about how dangerous it was to carry an axe while hunting, and I had decided I'd save a few coon hides and get a good gun. Boy, I shouldn't have mentioned getting a gun. My mother got sitting hen mad at me. "You're not getting a gun," she said. "I won't have that at all. I told you a long time ago you could have one when you were 21 years old, and I mean just that. I worry enough with you out there in the hills all hours of the night, running and jumping. but I couldn't stand it if I knew you had a gun with you. No, sir, you can just forget about that. Yes, ma'am, I said, and sulked off to my room. Lying on my bed, still trying to figure out what I could do to help, I glanced over to the wall. There, tied in a small bundle, was just what I needed. Some time back, my sisters had made some flowers for Decoration Day. They had given me a small bouquet for my room. Taking them down, I could see they had faded a little and looked rather old, but they were still pretty. I blew the dust off and straightened the crinkled petals. Putting them inside my shirt, I left the house. I hadn't gone far when I heard something behind me. It was my dogs. I tried to tell them I wasn't going hunting. I just had a little business to attend to, and if they would go back, I'd take them out that night. It was no use. They couldn't understand. Circling around through the flats, I came to the hollow above the Pritchard's place. Down below me, I could see the graveyard and the fresh mound of dirt. As quietly as I could, I started easing myself down the mountainside. Old Dan loosened a rock. The further it bounced, the louder it got. It slammed up against a post oak tree and sounded like a gunshot. I held my breath and watched the house. No one came out. I glared at old Dan. He wagged his tail, and just to show off, he sat down on his rear and started digging out a flea with his hind leg. The way his leg was thumping in the leaves, anyone could have heard it for a mile. I waited until he quit thumping before starting on again. Reaching the bottom, I had about 20 yards of clearing to cross, but the grass and bushes were pretty thick. Laying down on my stomach with my heart beating like a trip hammer, I wiggled my way to Reuben's grave. I laid the flowers on the fresh mound of earth and then turned around and scooted for the timber. Just as we reached the mountaintop, my foot slipped and I kicked loose a large rock. Down the side of the mountain it rolled. This time the blue tick hound heard the noise. He came out from under the house bawling. I heard a door slam and Mrs. Pritchard came out. She stood looking this way and that way. The hound ran up to the graveyard and started sniffing and bawling. Mrs. Pritchard followed him. Seeing the flowers on Reuben's grave, she picked them up and looked at them. She scolded the hound and then looked up at the hillside. I knew she couldn't see me because the timber was too thick, but I felt uncomfortable anyway. Scolding the hound again, she knelt down and arranged the flowers on the grave. Taking one more look at the hillside, she started back. Halfway to the house, I saw her reach down and gather the long cotton skirt in her hand and dab at her eyes. I felt much better after paying my respects to Reuben. Everything looked brighter and I didn't have that funny feeling anymore. All the way home, my dogs kept running out in front of me. They would stop, turn around, and look at me. I had to smile, for I knew what they wanted. I stopped and petted them a little and told them as soon as I got home and had my supper, we would go hunting. And that is the end of the chapter. One thing I want to bring your attention to is as we go through life, we know that things don't always go our way. And sometimes we do have that feeling of just emptiness or what do I do? And even though this isn't a Christian author that wrote this book, it brings a point that I want us as believers to be reminded of when we go through hard stuff like this. We have God right there with us in the midst of it. We have him he can give us wisdom through his word. We can pray to him and the Holy Spirit can give us peace. And that comes from being a believer, a child of God. And so I just want you guys to remember that when you're going through hard stuff, and as we read this story and he goes through hard stuff, what would you do in a situation like that? Hopefully you would go to the Lord and lean on him. All right, I'll talk to you next time. See ya.